thinking back to, we moved into our office in November of 2018, and we certainly weren't concerned about the loan and the valuation of the building. We were mostly interested, are there other tenants? Is the rent stabilized in the building? And is this a good situation for us to move? And is the financial transaction, does that make sense for us? And it did, so we made the move. But to think about doing due diligence and valuations of the underlying building, that's unusual.
Yeah, and the brokers, are often a big help there. They know the market really well, and typically they have a good read on the landlord's bank situation. But in this market, landlords are forthcoming with that information because the market is so competitive. Historically, for larger deals, you would try to negotiate a subordination non-disturbance agreement so that if the property is foreclosed, they have to recognize the bank as their new landlord. That's been the case for years, but now it gets a little more tricky with those concession packages we talked about. So that's where it gets hard, because is the bank going to agree if they become the landlord because of a foreclosure event? Are they going to agree to honor that free rent or that very generous tenant improvement allowance? That's money out of their pocket after they're taking over an asset that was underwater. And that's a tough negotiation. It gets complex. So a lot of deals now are stalling because the bank and the landlord and the tenant cannot agree on who's taking that risk.
So when we're talking the tenant improvement allowances, we just heard an average in the DC metro area of $150 a square foot on tenant improvements, and roughly 20 to 24 months of free rent. So these concessions are really quite substantial.
That's real money. I mean, on a sizable deal, you're talking millions of dollars in tenant improvement allowance. If there's any question that the landlord may not be able to keep the property, you don't want that money to be at risk. That's complex negotiations, and it's challenging because the bank is a party to that SNDA agreement, or the bank has to approve the lease if it's a large lease. We need the bank to agree to this ahead of time, and they often are not doing it.
And to kind of keep it simple, stupid, if the valuation of the building gets written down by 30 or 40%, the landlord's not able to renegotiate their underlying financing on the building, they turn the building back over to the lender. If I'm the tenant, I'm stuck with this lender, and I may be able to occupy the premises, but if the lease gets wiped out, then I don't really have much contractually, and if there's no way for me to force the lender to actually fund the tenant improvement allowance, that $150 a square foot for construction costs might not be worth the paper it's printed on.
That's exactly the situation. Typically, the form lease would probably say that the lender, if it becomes the landlord, does not have to honor those agreements. That language would be in the SNDA or in maybe in the lease, or maybe in a third agreement. Sometimes we see the landlords guarantee the allowance through a separate entity. Almost always the owner of the building is a LLC that has no other assets. So you can't get a guarantee from them, that's the lease. But you can get a guarantee from a deep-pocketed institutional investor to guarantee that if you're sure that the landlord has those sort of wherewithal.